All right, thank you. I want to talk just a little bit. I want to return to this issue. Is it working? I need to hold it better. Okay. I want to return to the issue of the discipline-specific nature of critical thinking classes. As we have already discussed, Lilienfeld suggested that critical thinking should be discipline-specific, and has already been discussed. Many of us in this room who teach critical thinking classes do not teach it in that way, and we've talked about some of the barriers that prevent it. But I have recently created a discipline-specific course in my home discipline, which is human development and family science, and I really have two reasons for feeling a very urgent need to teach critical thinking in my own discipline. One is the problem of naive realism. We studied children and families, basically, and every single person in here, anywhere, has personal experience with children and families. They were one, they lived in one, they created one, right? Everybody thinks they know everything they need to know about children and families from their own personal experience. What this means is so many false beliefs that are really taken to be kind of gospel truth. The second reason that I'm really intent on doing this in my discipline is in terms of our happiness, health and happiness, human flourishing, there is literally nothing that is more important in determining happiness than our family relationships. Lots of research has demonstrated this to be true. This makes us vulnerable to exploitation. People will play on our vulnerabilities, and so there is a lot of scam, basically, fraud, all this sort of stuff. And I see so much of it in my work that I really feel like the need for critical thinking in HDFS is rather urgent. So I just want to share some of my reflections, really. I've called them lessons learned, but they're really just my reflections about doing this in my own discipline. I originally thought I would teach a course 50 Great Myths style. I've been working on measuring false beliefs for about a decade now in my professional life, and I have a long list of false beliefs about children and families, and I thought, that list that's my syllabus. I'm just going to do that. I ended up not doing it that way. There are lots of false beliefs. You can see how many of them and how widely held they are among students in my department, and you can see some of these are believed by virtually everyone. One that I was surprised by, fully a third of my students think that the Wayfair furniture company might be sex trafficking children. Frankly, I was astounded. So there's lots and lots of false beliefs, but false beliefs have some limitations. I've been working on creating lists of false beliefs about children and families for a long time, and I've discovered that kind of whether you like it or not, your beliefs bleed into those lists, and you end up including things on the list that are really your take on a controversy in your field. Or, to Kyle's point, it's about the definition of a word, and we kind of call these things myths, so they're problematic. But the main reason I did not end up using a list of false beliefs is that they don't capture most of the bad stuff that is happening in my field. This is the intentional deception and the exploitation of social identities. So now I'm going to give you a bunch of examples of things in my own discipline that are really not about false beliefs, but they're about deception and exploitation of social identities. I do want to include some of the false beliefs, of course, because I want to rebut the content. This is called content rebuttal. And I want them to come in with believing something wrong and then learning that they're wrong and now knowing what the right answer is. So I do want to do that. But the anti-vax movement, I'm not going to teach a course in child development and not talk about the anti-vax movement. What false belief is there are some, but mainly what I want my students to get out of that is to recognize the hallmarks of pseudoscience so that they can see them here in a very clear example. And I know you didn't memorize my list, but at this point, I'm very happy to report that only something like 7 or 8% of my students believe the anti-vax kind of stuff. So this isn't widely believed, but we can use it to teach students how to recognize pseudoscience and science denial. I am really geared up these days about romance scams. In 2020, when the pandemic hit, people were lonely, They were stuck at home, and they were online a lot. And romance scams absolutely exploded. And I just see this as so offensive to exploit people's very natural desire and need to have meaningful human relationships. I find it so offensive. But what has happened since 2020 is this. Online scams, we thought the explosion was in 2020. It wasn't. It is still going. These are not just romance scams, but lots of online financial scams either target the elderly, are romance, or family related. Many, many of them are. And AI is only making this worse. Grandparent scams at the moment are a big deal because AI can generate a voice that sounds just like your grandchild, who calls you and says, I just got into an accident. I don't want to call my mom. Please send me this money to get me out of jail, or whatever it is. And this is going crazy. A couple of things that you might not have heard of. I don't see these talked about in skeptical circles, but they're really meaningful to me. I'm a parenting expert. Specifically, I study infant sleep and parenting related to infant sleep. This book, Growing Kids God's Way, is a religious advice book, and there are parenting programs built around this book in churches primarily. But in the late 90s, the authors decided to go secular. So they took Growing Kids God's Way and they turned it into a secular book called On Becoming Baby Wise, that you wouldn't know it has a religious foundation. But the essence of this book is something called parent-directed feeding, parent-directed sleeping, all these sorts of things. So the parent is in charge because God is in charge. And so we don't want kids to take control over anything in their life. So for instance, when you're feeding a toddler, you should tie his arms to the arms of the high chair so that he cannot reach out and grab the food himself, which, if you study child development, very normal behavior, developmentally appropriate, we like to see it. Don't do it, because that way the child is taking too much control over their own life and learning the wrong lesson. Well, before I came to Fresno State, I worked in medicine. While I was working in medicine, emergency rooms were full of dehydrated and starving infants because their parents were following Growing Kids God's Way or On Becoming Baby Wise, and they were feeding on a very strict schedule. They were never responding to infant cues that they needed to nurse. Moms were losing their milk supply, et cetera, et cetera. Horrible, horrible parenting advice. It's an exploitation of people's religious beliefs. Another example of this is another book I love to hate. This one was brought to me by a student. The original cover to Train a Child looks like this because the authors say, we live near some Amish folks, and the way they train their horses is such a good model. I am not kidding. Read it in the book yourself. Such a good model for how to raise children. So they recommend things like blanket training, where you put an infant, you can start at 6 months, on a blanket on the floor, some desirable object next to them. And when they reach for the desirable object, you hit them. And you have to cause pain. This is training, and it is training them to be obedient and to not have initiative in their own life because they need to be obedient to God. This book, very famously, has led to multiple child deaths. Parents are sitting in jail because they are following this book to the letter, and in so doing are punishing their children literally to death. One of these cases happened here in California, in Paradise, before it burned down. I thought it was too horrible to put on our map of horrible things that are happening in California, but these cases are happening. Anyway, do you see what I mean by the exploitation of social identity? And this just really grinds my gears, guys. In terms of exploitation of social identities, the manosphere has essentially been created by recommendation algorithms that exploit not a particular false belief that you could identify, but people's need to find community, their uncertainty about how they're going to make a living, their uncertainty about not having yet found a love partner, et cetera, et cetera. Tradwives, this trend similarly creates an impression of what's going on that just plays on women's desires to have kind of an aesthetically pleasing life, to feel like they know what their role in the world should be at a time when it feels uncertain to many women. So I want to teach my students some media literacy skills so that they recognize what's going on when they're scrolling that feed. But you see how none of these have anything to do really with false beliefs. So one lesson learned is that instead of just rebutting false beliefs, I also really want to inject some technique rebuttal. I want them to see the techniques that are being used against them so that they can recognize when they see it. I only have 5 minutes, but my second lesson learned, really it's just a reflection, is I couldn't believe in practice how much these things were interwoven. I thought I'm going to have a lecture on scams, I'm going to have a lecture on conspiracy theories, I'm going to have a lecture on cults or whatever. They pretty much all show up in the same, they all show up. I want to use this example. I brought Twin Flames Universe into my class because they're a classic online cult, and it's a family theme. They promise to help people find their love match, their soulmate, their twin flame. And they have a money-back guarantee, et cetera, et cetera. I'll get more into this. But you know, they do have some false beliefs. It is a very common false belief that there is one true love for each person. You find your one person and then you're going to be happy forever. These are classic false beliefs. But they also bring in the New Age kind of esoteric belief of, well, twin flame is a New Age concept, but so is manifesting. And a lot of their advice is really about how to manifest your twin flame. So that's another thing. But pure online scam. I mean, it is so classic. When you sign up for Twin Flames Universe, you join a tier, a subscription of these courses, and you can get the first course, I don't know, $599. Second course, $1,299. There's a course for $9,000. Like classic scam. What is the essence of the courses that you're buying? It's Jeff and Shalea sitting on a sofa, just like you saw in the picture, giving you super bad advice. And let me give you an example of how bad that advice is. When you find your twin flame, you don't take no for an answer. They don't want to date you? Oh, that's your twin flame. You keep going. When they file a restraining order, you keep going. And Twin Flames Universe members are sitting in jail today because they are violating these kinds of restraining orders. I mean, it's pretty horrible advice, but also pure online scam. Pure online scam. They set up a coaching service, but they set it up as a multi-level marketing company. So you could become a coach, but all the money you make as coaches goes to Jeff and Shalea. The only way you can ever make money is if you recruit new coaches. And so in my class, we did MLMs. I looked at that and thought, well, damn, they're doing it all. There's nothing they've left out here. Pseudoscience, yeah, they've got that too. They came up with a program, mind alignment process to train people, to cure post-traumatic stress disorder. On what grounds could that possibly work? Oh, no, we have a doctor who created it. That doctor has a PhD in engineering. She doesn't know anything. She has no credentials about mental health, and yet they sell it just like pseudosciences are sold. Finally, of course, they became a religious cult. Jeff claims to be Jesus Christ himself. Actually, he says, I'm not a reincarnation of Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ was a foretelling of me. That's great, right? And the reason they've sort of been exposed, and they are currently in lots and lots of trouble, they took this sort of one step too far. They had all these women in Twin Flames, and they had a money-back guarantee, I mentioned, to find your twin flame. They weren't going to be able to accomplish it because they were all women, and then no one was finding using that great advice to great effect. So they just decided to assign women. Half of them had to be divine masculines, and they were to marry each other, and people were going through gender transitions, sometimes medically, to sort of meet the dictate of this religious cult. I think what will finally get them is that they also brought people into their homes in essentially a slavery to do work around their house as interns for the church of Twin Flames Universe. So that's what will take them down, just like a lot of other cults. But these are just the observations I've had. Thank you for letting me share them. First, there are lots of false beliefs about children and families, but also lots of intentional deception and exploitation of social identities. Thank you very much.